Preparing for grad school, FirstGen and the hidden curriculum. The Onda Student Center at UCSB promotes the success and retention of first-generation college students with an emphasis on the first-year transition and underrepresented student experience. We provide mentoring and academic support in a learning-centered space for students to connect with faculty, staff, and peers in order to grow personally and excel academically. Let's begin the conversation on the hidden curriculum of graduate school. Join master's student Grad Peer Mentor Sofi in learning about the hidden curriculum of graduate school, aka the things they won't teach us, yet expect us to know.
Thank you all for joining us for the Onda Student Center program, Preparing for Grad School, FirstGen, and the Hidden Curriculum. I am the grad student mentor, Sophie, and joining me is Student Activities Coordinator, Denise.
Hey everyone, happy Friday. I did put a question in the chat, just kind of get to know who's in the room. You can say your name, your major, your year, and where you're zooming in from, so where you're currently located. And I'm Denise, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers, and ella, and I'm the Student Activities Coordinator.
Thank you. And as y'all type your name and major so we can kind of get to know what fields y'all are interested in, I'll go ahead and explain that what we're expecting to do today. Our presentation will start off with a brief introduction, getting into what the hidden curriculum is, some examples and impacts on first-gen scholars, as well as a community action plan, some resources that are available to UCSB students, and we'll have space for a Q&A at the end. So if y'all have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, as well as just like saving them at the end so we can have a discussion about them. My name is Sofi Asenabreguian. Please call me Sophie. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am a first-year master's student in education with UCSB's Graduate School of Education, and I am a proud first-gen scholar, and my research interest is looking at how Hispanic serving institutes effectively assist first-gen students and what they've done in the past and what they're currently doing. And with that, I'll pass it on to Denise.
Hi again, everyone. My name is Denise Diaz. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. I'm a first-gen queer Latina. I actually graduated from UC Riverside with my BA in sociology, and then I went on and completed my master's in higher ed and student affairs from the University of San Francisco. I'm actually really new to my position. I started in August, and previously I was living in Colorado and working at Colorado State University for 2 years. So I'm really excited to be here with you all and really excited to work for the Onda Student Center and have a space where there's so many other first-gen individuals working alongside me. It's definitely a different experience to be able to be in that type of community daily.
Thank you for sharing, Denise. So what is it? Like, what is the hidden curriculum? Honestly, this is a concept that was new to me as of like this past year, but it's really interesting because it applies to many of us. This definition here is by Jessica Calarco, and it's from this book that actually came out this past year. And I believe the title is A Guide to Graduate School, the Hidden Curriculum. And I do have it cited at the end in case y'all are interested in taking a look. And her definition is the things you're expected to know or do, but won't be explicitly taught. And I like this definition for one. It was simple for myself to grasp the concept, and it made sense to me. And this concept itself, it's not new. It was created by Philip Jackson in 1968, but when it was originally created, it was applied to, I think, K through 12 or like elementary school education, and looking at just the practices embedded in school practices. So it's developed a bit since then, but it's still the same concept. And in Calarco's book, she actually makes this reference that really stood out to me. And she compares the hidden curriculum to asking her grandma for a blueberry pie recipe. But for myself, I like applying things to my own life. So I thought of, what if I were to ask my grandma for like a tamales recipe? And the concept is that my grandma, like, she knows how to make tamales. I know she knows how to make tamales, but she's never told me before. And I mean, I haven't asked her before, but if she were to ask me to make tamales, I wouldn't know. And so in that way, in asking for my grandma for the recipe, like, of course she'll know, she knows the recipe. She might not be able to tell me like off the top of her head the recipe. And she does, she might be missing things, but I take that knowledge for granted that she knows, and she might have taken it for granted that I know. And I'm hoping that that example is not too confusing, but I'll expand as we move on into why is it hidden? Why is this knowledge hidden? Like I don't believe that knowledge should be hidden, right? But it's not necessarily hidden on purpose. It's assumed or take it for granted that we were already taught this information somewhere else. And maybe some folks have had that when they're entering a class, maybe a math class, and they're like, oh, you should have learned this last quarter. Like, you should have learned this in high school. I'm like, no, I did not learn this in high school. And so there's just this assumption. And it's that same take it for grantedness that keeps hidden knowledge of academia hidden. And referring back to the tamales example, as I mentioned, like I may be taking my grandma's tamales making knowledge for granted, which makes it a bit difficult for her to share. And it goes back to referring to hidden curriculum in higher education, not in tamales making. It's this inequitable access. So of course, if knowledge is hidden, how are we supposed to access it? And I have here a quote by Dr. Laura Rendon, who is like my idol in higher education, first gen literature. And this is a quote from her chapter article, I don't recall, but it's called From Barrio to the Academy. And it's her experience as a first gen Latina entering higher education. And she said, higher education belonged to the elite, the wealthy, and we clearly were not that group. As she mentioned her experience entering a four-year institution, she just didn't feel like she belonged. And it goes back to say that the foundations the institutions were built upon, they are rooted in patriarchy. And these institutions are existing and working the way that they were made to work, which was for white men, unfortunately. So as many of us are first gen scholars, which means our parents didn't go to higher education, they didn't complete higher education. We don't have our parents, or most likely don't have support from people around us that have attended. So we don't really know these things. And I would like to pause to see if there's any questions or if Denise would like to add anything.
I think it's just important to unpack, the hidden curriculum. Oftentimes we navigate different systems and navigate institutions with already a code that we're supposed to know, right? Or maybe, there's these things that we should know how to do, but like no one told us. I remember going to college and I was figuring it out all on my own. And so I think it's important to be in spaces like this and we're all together so we can learn how to unpack that and see what what resources we can come up as a community. There's a lot of wealth in our knowledge and our skills and our experiences. So really coming together and talking about that is really important. I think what I'd like to throw out to the group is what about this specific presentation, being first gen in the hidden curriculum, made you interested in attending today?
That is a great question. And that's something that even myself, I should reconsider, like why, I guess I can answer that. Like, why did I make this presentation, or why did I, think of creating this? And for myself, I thought, well, this is something I didn't know. And when I read about the hidden curriculum, I'm like, wow, like that's true. It's hidden. Why is it hidden? Why didn't I know these things? And as a first year master's student, I just came straight from undergrad. I graduated, got my BA in history, and then I started the real world and started my program. And there's so many things that I didn't know. I didn't know how to do them. I didn't know, and I'm still learning. And it's unfortunate. I just didn't have, people around me or in my immediate community that went to higher education. So I couldn't ask them. And I think as first gen, that's a shared experience. And I do want to add that as we're talking about this, Denise and I and the Onda Student Center, we are a resource for students and to close that gap and just assist us with resources that we can. I think it's always great to know more. And if any of y'all are like interested or barely in that, starting to consider graduate school, I'm really grateful that y'all are joining us today to start looking and start gaining that knowledge.
Really quick, so Lori put something in the chat. She said, I didn't know that there was a concept like the hidden curriculum, but I realized in the past I have come across instances where professors expected us to know certain material. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, Lori?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, like I remember my first year, I'm a bio major, and a lot of the students there, or the students that I know, I don't want to generalize, but do have parents who've gone to college. And I just remember like professors are just expected us to know what to expect in the 4 years of college. Like, oh, you're gonna go through like, I don't know, just a lot of courses. And I was like, well, I'm a first gen. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, and yeah, and also they expected us to know certain material that wasn't taught in my high school and that must have been taught in other high schools. So yeah, there was a disadvantage definitely there.
Thank you for sharing, Lori. And I agree. And it is unfortunate that there is just knowledge or just things that are expected of us that, they just assume. And it's just this based on this assumption that we know things, and sometimes we really don't. And so them assuming we know things, we just kind of get left behind, or we have to find these resources or find the answers or work these things out on our own.
Is anybody else able to relate or maybe have an experience of their own? Or want to share like what about the hidden curriculum being first gen made you interested in coming to this event?
I'll go on with a few examples, but I will be monitoring the chat just to see, and then we can have that discussion as it comes up. But I do want to share some examples of things these are mostly things that I've been learning in like either the past year or so. And they're things like etiquette. So entering higher education, like I didn't know that you had to address faculty on a first name basis, and I still find it odd and I'm still adjusting. I still find it odd to like address my professor but by like, oh, Ricardo, like nice to see you, or I don't know. It's odd, but it's something that everyone else seemed to know, especially like folks that were not necessarily first gen, and they knew that's just how things are done. And another example is there's no dress code in graduate school, at least for the most part that I'm familiar with. But that's something that when I first started looking into graduate programs, I literally Googled like, what's the dress code for graduate school? Because I didn't know if I should start like building up my like buying new clothes, or what I should start how I should start dressing, or if I dress normal, like are other people going to be dressed a certain way and I'll be an outsider? And that's not the case. And like in some cases, I do recommend having like, that it's beneficial to have like some professional wardrobe for the conferences, or if you have like interviews and whatnot. But in classes, although things are remote now, even in person, it's not required to have like this professional appearance. But another thing is deciphering jargon. And for myself, I'm still learning a lot of terms. I still don't know what like advancing to candidacy really entails, but a lot of folks know that. And if I was maybe around people before, like with my had family that did their PhD, then I would be in the loop. I would know like, oh, that's what it means. And I'm still learning, and I'm doing a master, so I have time to learn. But it would be pretty cool if I had already looked into it and I already knew what that was, so I could be on the same like conversation with my peers. A lot of them are in PhD programs. And another thing is the application process, and this is something really important. And I've had quite a few students that identify as first gen, and when they ask me questions, they ask me like, how do I start? Where do I start? How do I start looking for a program? Or like, is there any tips or any advice you can give? And I give advice of things that were my lived experiences. And something important to note is that the application process, when applying to graduate school, it starts way before you open up the application. It starts when you are looking for a program or considering a program, or before that is considering if you want to go to graduate school, or if you just want to graduate out of undergrad and then just enter the workforce. Or there's still like a lot of decisions before the actual application process. So the informal start of the application process starts long before, because there's a lot of things to consider. And there's exams, exam prep, and fee waivers. And I kind of clump these together, but they should probably be separate things. But then there's exams. There's the most common entry exam is the GRE. And I didn't know what the GRE was. I didn't know how to find waivers. I didn't know how to prepare. And there's these things that, when you're looking into graduate school, maybe you decided a few months like before an application closes that you want to start, like you want to apply for a program, but then you might see that their program, it requires a GRE, or if you're going to like teaching, it requires like the CBEST or the CSET or different exams. So then that's something else to consider. And for myself, like I applied to programs that didn't require the GRE because there are some programs that don't require it. For some departments for UCSB, they don't require the GRE. So that's another thing to consider. Because for myself, and I share these experiences because I hope that they are, beneficial or insightful. But I didn't qualify as like a low income student. So I didn't qualify for EOP, or I didn't qualify for fee waivers. So then the GRE, it would be out of my pocket. So I didn't want to pay the total amount of the GRE. And so I was fortunate enough to find programs that didn't require it. And fee waivers on themselves. Some applications, some institutions, like on their website, it doesn't show anything about fee waivers, but you can literally just contact them, contact the director, contact someone on their like website, and just ask about if they have any fee waivers available. And quite often that I know of, that they do have fee waivers, or they might say like, oh, you should attend this orientation and you'll get a fee waiver for the program application. Or it's just really great to reach out. And for myself, I was timid. I did my application process on my own for the most part. So I was fortunate when I just like opened the application. I don't know, I just applied for the fee waiver for like the UCSB program, although I hadn't qualified for fee waivers or low income as like, so I applied for it and I got it. And I was like so glad, because that saved me so much money, because program like applications, they cost money, a lot of money. So it's really that it's worth just trying. And the worst they can say is just like, no, we're not offering any. And that's okay. At least there's that effort. And if they do offer it to you, then that's great. That's money saved. And another part is choosing a program, like how to choose a program. I graduated from Cal Poly Pomona in history, and I didn't know that immediately. I didn't know that I could either go for my master's or PhD in history, or in education or law. I could change the direction of what programs I wanted to attend. And I didn't really know that until I was speaking with one of my professors, because I was completely lost. And I'm like, okay, I don't know who else to talk to. So I just went to my professor to ask him. And I really did find what I wanted to do, which is my master's in education. But there's a lot of different programs that you can consider, and also the types of programs. There's master's, and then there's PhD, which are more research based, and there's professional programs, and there's just a variety of different programs that can be considered. And then the preparing documents, like the CV and resume. And the CV stands for like curriculum vitae. I haven't heard it in person, so I'm not familiar. But a CV is basically a professional academic resume. And I originally didn't know what a CV was, but programs were like asking for a CV. And so I had to kind of, I got a lot of feedback, and was like, I asked a lot of like, oh, can you go over my CV? Hopeful that I was going on the right path. That's how I got to know what it was. But I still get a lot of questions about like, oh, what's a CV, or how can I do it? And then there's the statement papers, which is something else. And they're essentially statements of purpose, or statement of, there's different types of statement papers that they may ask for, but they're meant to answer the question of like, why do you want to attend the program? And, what are you going to do in this program? What is your motivation? What do you want to research? And it's more note telling of what you want to do. And I know I've been talking for a bit. So is there any questions or any insight or any examples that anyone would like to add?
I had a question. So you had just mentioned that for the grad school, you don't really have to, like, you can go into whichever one and change it. So I don't necessarily have to graduate from what I want to continue as.
So there's, I guess I don't want to say like, oh, like just anything, but and there's a lot of like space to kind of choose programs. I know someone that is currently like a music major and is planning to go into law, and that's totally possible too. And I don't think there's a set list of like, okay, I'll use myself, like I was a history major, I have to go in history. I'm pretty sure I could have gone into business, and for my, like I'd say it's a lot about like those transferable skills. As like a history major, I'd say, you know, I did research analysis and or data analysis, and there's different aspects that transfer over, and it would be helpful in some cases. But I am in education, and I didn't do any minor. I didn't do anything in education, and so there is a bit of a learning curve because folks that are my cohort, they know like, oh yeah, they know all these education terms or all these things that are specific really to education. But you know, it's just, it's not impossible, and it's definitely something I recommend. If what you're currently in isn't exactly what you want to pursue, then it's worth just reconsidering or just also speaking with someone to kind of get their insight as well, or someone that has been in that program, or you know, I feel like I could better word this, but Denise, do you have any insight?
Yeah, no, you definitely don't need to go into whatever you graduate, like your undergrad with. You don't need to go follow a strict path for a professional degree, for a master's, PhD, you know, law, like medical school, whatever it may be. You don't necessarily have to graduate with a very specific minor or major in undergrad. It'll definitely enhance it, right? Like if you, I don't know, there was like in my undergrad, there was a sociology, law, and society, right? And if after I had gotten that major or that degree and then got into law school, like it would have enhanced it. But at the end of the day, I could have gone into law school or gone into whatever career through whatever major or whatever degree I got in undergrad. I'd like to think of it, I have always thought about it like your undergrad is a stepping stone into whatever career you want to go into or to whatever you want to pursue next. It doesn't necessarily, it's not going to make you or break you. And I wouldn't want you all to ever feel stuck because of because of a specific degree that you got in undergrad. You know, I think networking, connecting with folks in a desired career or professional track or whatever it is you want to pursue after is really important. Obviously, your passion, your commitment and dedication for that area, for that interest is really important. And just kind of building your resume, you know, if you have an internship or if you have a job that those skills, or even if you're volunteering in an organization, whatever that looks like, if those skills transfer, like all of that's going to help you. Your degree, your major, your degree in undergrad is definitely not going to hurt you. And that's not solely all that matters.
Thank you.
That's a great question, and it even made me think for a bit, but that's true. And I do want to add, like, there's always like application requirements, and it's like a list of different things. And like in some cases, it says like at least above a 3.0, or sometimes it says like above a 2.0 or 2.8. So there's different requirements for different programs. But usually, when I've seen, it doesn't say requirement like bachelor's in this or BS in this. They usually say like requires a like 4-year degree. So they don't specifically limit it to any majors that I've seen or the applications or programs that I've have experience with. And it may be different, but I definitely encourage when you're looking through different programs to kind of just like take into account and look into, does it say a specific major or not? Because I haven't seen any that require specific majors. And are there any more questions? All right. So going into a bit about funding. So funding was completely new concept for me for graduate school. It was way different than undergrad. Um, One thing that when I was speaking with my potential advisor, she emphasized for the program I was in, PhD programs are typically well funded, while the master's programs might not be, and it may not be true for every case. And something I want to emphasize is that graduate school is quite a different experience than undergraduate, because graduate school is a different experience for everyone. There's different research projects that people are taking, are doing. There's different exams or just different paths. Whereas undergrad, it could be like, you know, your GEs, and then, you know, your core classes. But with graduate school, it's more nuanced to your own research. If that's like if you're in like a research based program, and so everybody's experience in graduate school, I want to say, is different because everyone has a different advisor that they're working with, different projects, there's just a lot of different aspects. And continuing with funding. So internships, externships, fellowships, grants, and loans. I didn't know that like internships and things, they could pay for like my like academic experience as a master's student. And I didn't apply for internships, but I also didn't know that they were like a resource I could apply to. And so some folks that when I was entering, they already had internships or they already had like money secured. And I didn't, because I was like, how did they know that? And like, how did they find these things? And many of them actually, with my experience, they already knew the faculty that they wanted to work with. They already knew the school or they already knew someone. So they were already familiar with like the process. Um, but academic employments and free admissions. So even as a master's student, even I, even though from my own experience, I wasn't offered like grants as in like undergraduate, you know, there's like Pell Grant, whatnot. But there is academic employments that can cover tuition for programs. And again, I can speak on like UCSB as a graduate school. If there is, I think if you're at least like 50% in an academic employment, then they do cover your tuition completely. And it's like TA ships and graduate student researchers, like GSRs, I believe they're called. But they do offer that, or they call it free remissions. And they're great. And there's an abundance of TA ships, and there's a lot of these things that are available. But although I didn't know these things, like now that I know, I'm like, oh, like I don't really have to worry, you know. And the point I'm trying to get across is that funding shouldn't be as much of a concern as scary as it may seem, because there's typically a lot of opportunities. And I know that from Denise's experience in graduate school, her experience was a bit different because her program was different. And so I can't emphasize it enough, but there's just all these aspects in graduate school are going to be different, and so are funding. And I actually do hope that Denise can share a bit about her program, like how her program was structured. And yeah, I'll pass it on to you, Denise.
Something before going into my program that I want to emphasize to you all is always ask questions, because if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. But even when we're talking about like fee waivers, right, and seeing if a program has a fee waiver for the application, or asking about like employment internship opportunities, like fee remission, whatever it has to do, I would always email the manager, director, coordinator of the program, the point of contact of the program, and just ask. Because oftentimes they won't, talking about the hidden curriculum, right? They won't publicize it on their website or online. But if you ask the main point of contact, they'll be like, oh, yeah, you know, we actually do have some fee waivers, or we can cover the cost of your application. What I've seen programs do as well is if you attend their info sessions, their webinars or information sessions online, they actually will give you a fee waiver. Some programs, not all, so again, I would ask, but they'll give you a fee waiver if you attend their info sessions. So be on the lookout for that. Most programs will have some type of webinar, some type of info session to learn more about the program and ask questions as well. And then in terms of my program, so I went to the University of San Francisco, and it was higher education and student affairs. It was a 2-year program. My program was a cohort model, which means that I took classes with the same number of individuals throughout my 2 years. So it was 24 of us, and we took the exact same classes every semester, which I loved. I got to know my cohort really, really well. We became a big family, and it was just a really, really great experience for me. Most of the people in my cohort, about more than half, were people of color, were FirstGen, were LGBTQ identified. And so, again, that was really a really important aspect for choosing a program for me. And that was one of the great things about my program. What else? There was an internship component, so I was working while I was doing my program. Something that's different from program to program is some programs you'll take classes during the week, and other programs like mine, we actually took classes on the weekends. So it was Friday afternoons and most of Saturdays, every other week. And so we pretty much, like, few people who, there was folks who worked full time, or like myself, I worked part-time. It allowed us to work during the week, and then we went on class Friday and Saturdays. And it honestly wasn't a big deal. I think it allowed us to spread the work more evenly. And it gave us a dedicated time on Friday and Saturdays to actually be in class, and we got used to not being in class on the weekends. And it was only for 2 years, and it was every other week. What else? Some programs require certain exams, others don't. My program at the University of San Francisco didn't require a GRE, but I did apply to a lot of programs that did require the GRE. And depending what program, it'll be a different exam. If you go into business, if you go into law school, if you go into medical school, it'll have a different program. If you all ever want to have if you have any other questions for me, feel free to ask in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Later on, there's actually going to be a slide where my office hours are. And so I'd be more than happy to talk to you all about grad school, about my experience, about like anything in general. You can just stop by and introduce yourself, and I'd be more than happy to chat.
Thank you for sharing, Denise. And I do want to add, like, even though I'm currently a graduate student, like when I'm speaking with Denise, I've still learned things about, her experience. And like, wow, I didn't know that about, graduate programs. And if there are no questions, I will go on to like some things about professionalism. Like one thing is like for many graduate student experiences are conferences, as a participant and as a presenter. And professionalism in presenting your research. And I definitely believe that there's this expected professionalism, what's the better word? And being able to, I'm not even doing it, to effectively like share your thoughts. And that's a big part of like graduate school and being a researcher, if that's like the path that you're taking. And as again, these are things that, I kind of learned so far, and this is not like everything like that's hidden. There's so much that's still hidden from me that I'm still learning. And so this list is more of just a list to, hopefully some of these things were new to you, that, or hopefully not, but hopefully like this was insightful.
I'm gonna add something really quick on the conferences part. You can always get your conferences most of the time paid for, your membership, even maybe travel to going to a conferences when we can travel again. But attendance to conferences, If you ask your program, sometimes like the associate student body for grad students may have some sort of like funds or grants already allocated for grad students. So I would always look into if you can get different things paid for. And like I said, always ask because you never know. And the worst thing that they can tell you is sorry, no. And the best answer they could give you is, yeah, we'll pay for it. So definitely always ask and look and see if you can get your membership or attendance to a conference paid for, or the travel.
I definitely recommend that. And moving forward, I'm still keeping an eye on the chat in case there's any questions. But impacts on FirstGen scholars. So something as I have been doing my research in FirstGen literature is that FirstGen have this shared experience of wanting to take responsibility for their own success. And yes, like that sounds great. Like, yeah, like when I read that or when I was reading things like that, I'm just like, yeah, like, of course I want to be responsible for my own success. But the, I guess, not so beneficial part of that is that, many FirstGen take it upon themselves to succeed rather than asking for assistance when it may actually be needed. And I think it's important to just recognize that, because when I saw that, I'm like, yeah, like I kind of have done things on my own, but I definitely see, especially in retrospect, that many things, if I would have asked for help sooner, if I would have asked for help at all, then maybe the outcome could have been more of, how I hoped it could be. But the connection to imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome it could be defined many ways, but it's this sense of, feeling as an imposter in, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. um, just feeling an imposter in something that you're doing or in education, and how it connects is, if you're missing this knowledge that's kind of hidden, you're not really sure how to do something, or I wasn't really sure how to do some things. I kind of felt uncertain and I wasn't in the know, so I felt like, okay, I don't know this, everyone does, maybe I am not supposed to be here, maybe I'm the imposter because they just seem to know. But that's not true. Being accepted into a program, you were accepted for a reason. The programs, they acknowledge your potential and they acknowledge what you want to do, and that you will thrive in the program, because graduate programs are quite competitive. So being accepted into a program, I believe it's really important to recognize that also. And la familia, or the family. So as FirstGen, our parents didn't graduate or attend higher education. And so there's these familiar pressures that maybe continuing gen won't experience because their parents already know how it is. And this misunderstanding of what higher education entails, they may not understand the extent of accomplishments or hardships. And for example, for myself, like I have in a project that I'm doing, my independent research project, and it's going well. And I have been trying to tell my parents, especially my mom, like what that means, like what I'm doing. And although they are excited, they don't really know what that means. So it's just we're not on that same level of like excitedness. They're like, oh, okay, like que bien, like that's cool. I'm just like, all right. So it's a bit discouraging because it's like, shoot, they don't really, they don't really see what it really is. And also going back to the misunderstanding what higher education entails, I think it's important of things like maybe as FirstGen, like maybe your parents are like wanting to know what are you doing, but then, or I guess I could just use an example. I'm best at using examples rather than explaining. But in the past, as an undergrad, I attended conferences that were for my organization, and they would be in LA. And my mom was like, why are you going? Like, why do you have to drive there? What's the reason? And like, why do you have to go to these different universities? I'm like, well, it's an experience for myself. It's, experience I can grow from, and I could learn and, just be able to network with other folks. But, my mom, she didn't see the importance in that. It's just like, why attend? What's beneficial of that? And although I was able to attend, and I'm grateful that I was able to attend, there was just kind of those, we didn't see eye to eye on, such thing as like conferences. And there's also the lack of representation. So many programs in much of higher education, they are predominantly like non-first gen. And so there's this sense of like otherness and, this lack of community. And I know from some experience that, if I'll just go back to my own experience. If I was in a class with a lot of folks, but there wasn't someone like me, like Latinx, or someone I could instantly connect with, I'd be a bit timid to share my experience or like to ask something, or, I don't want to feel like that oddball in the group. And these are topics that are really important. And I would like to ask if anybody has like anything they would like to add or experience that they've had, or if there's any questions or anything.
I have a question, Sophie.
Mhm.
Since you recently started your grad school, how has that been, like that transition from undergrad to the transition to a first year grad student? Has there been any difficulties or like fun stories as well, good and bad?
So I do want to share like my experience. I graduated and I started my program during COVID. So 2020 was my year because I was doing all these big moves, but there was a pandemic. So my experience has been a bit different than, I expected. But it has been difficult in the way that like this is the first time I'm out of my parents' house. I moved and I'm adulting now and just doing all these things. But initially, I hadn't even told my parents when I applied to graduate schools because there was that like my own imposter syndrome that I wouldn't get accepted. And I knew once I told them about programs, they would be concerned about like, oh, how am I going to do these things? How am I going to have to move? Like if they were going to have to pay for it, and different concerns that they would have. So I waited until I got accepted to actually tell my parents that I applied and I got accepted to programs. And so then they started worrying, and they still haven't stopped worrying. And maybe that's, my experience as like a Latina daughter, but that's, I'm still balancing that out. And I'm still, connecting with my family to kind of help them understand also what this means. And something else that I'd like to share is that like my parents, they didn't know what the difference is between like a master's and PhD. And when I said like, oh, it's a master's, like, oh, so you're gonna be like doctora? I'm like, no. And then they're like, so what are you doing? I'm like, well, it's master's. It's kind of, I explained to them it's like kind of in the middle. And they're like, oh, okay. So they're still not exactly too sure what I'm doing. And emphasizing on that, I do want to add that it's not required to go straight from like it's not required to do like your bachelor's or that 4-year degree, master's, and then PhD. In some cases, you can just do your 4-year degree and then pursue your PhD. And that's something I didn't know. I did not know. I thought it was like you had to do master's and then PhD if that's your interest. But I have folks in my cohort that they just graduated from like their 4-year and they're in the PhD program. And I was so amazed. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that was an option. And I think for myself, I wouldn't have gone straight to my PhD because I'm still learning and I'm still new to like the field of education. But I do want to point out that's also another thing. It's a possibility also. And going back to your question though, yeah, it's been a big change. Um, there's just been so much, and I'm still learning about graduate school. I'm still learning how to be a student, but I'm already, almost halfway through my program. So it does go by quick, and I feel like I have a decent grasp on what graduate school is. And as for fun experiences, it's just Zoom. It has been a bit difficult to make friends, but there's still that community when we're like in Zoom breakout rooms. But something fun I did learn though was that many folks, although like when we're having discussion, they're so well composed and they're like saying so much great stuff. I'm like, wow, like they really know their stuff. I talked to them later in like a breakout room and they're like, I had no idea what I was saying. Like, I just hope it sounded good. I'm like, it sounded amazing. Like, of course you knew what you're saying. And they're like, even some folks, they doubt themselves and they sound great. Like they sound fine. So that's something else that it kind of just stuck with me. Like, wow. Sorry, I kind of keep going on tangents.
I was gonna say I'm Sophie's best friend right now in the remote world. We talk a lot, we connect a lot.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, I think the first gen identity, you know, we all know that it doesn't end after, there's no end point, you know, even for myself, like I'm a first gen, grad, I'm a first gen scholar, but I'm still first gen, I'm also first gen professional. And even like a lot of these, like I, you know, have always felt like I needed to work twice as hard, right, than like my counterparts and my peers or folks who aren't first gen, whether it was in the professional world, now in the professional world, or in when I was in school. And, you know, this imposter syndrome of feeling like you're not enough. Like as I started my new position and, you know, every time I've taken a new position, I'm always like, you know, am I enough for the position? Can I really apply? Like, and it starts like even the application, right? Where like I second doubt myself. And with the family pressures, I moved back to my childhood home. I'm currently located in Oxnard, and you know, my mom, like, one, she doesn't like. I try to explain to her what I do in higher ed. She's like, "So, are you like a teacher? Like, are you an administrator? My family, like, eres maestra?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not." But it's hard. Like, it's hard to explain what I do in like UCSB, right? Working with the Onda Student Center. There's that like she understands, but not really. And then the lack of representation. All the positions that I've had, you know, we've hardly ever talked about what it means to be a first gen. Or, you know, there wasn't a lot of like Latinas or queer folks, people of color in spaces. And so I think a lot of these definitely tie into the professional world. And, you know, it's important. And I remind myself all the time, you know, when I think I'm not enough, I'm like, no, I am enough. Like, I am more than capable of whatever position I'm reaching for next or whatever program I'm applying to. And like, yes, I've worked twice as hard and I've had a lot of great mentors and community support around me who have always pushed me to ask questions and have pushed me to, you know, when I have the conversation of like, for example, negotiations when getting a new job, right? You always ask and you ask and ask, and all that's super, super uncomfortable, especially for me as a woman, especially as a Latina, as someone who grew up low income, like to ask for more money. And, you know, we never ask, we're never going to get it. So it's definitely my supervisor now, Malapan Pomasa. She is always, something I love about her is that she's always like asking questions. And, you know, she's always like, oh, I'll ask. And that really inspires me because I'm like, okay, like I'm going to ask, like I'm going to continue asking because why not?
I agree. And asking is like, I've been shy, like I am shy, but asking is like, I definitely encourage it. And again, like the worst is just like no or no answer. But the best is, you know, you get answers, you get resources, you get insight into things. And what can we do? So this action plan, confidence is key. That's the first thing. And I guess it can be like an action plan. This could be an action plan for like life, but for graduate school or the hidden curriculum and life, like confidence in what you do is key. Confidence in, you know, no, you're not an imposter in graduate school, or you're not an imposter in what you're applying yourself to. Asking questions, as we emphasize, is very important. And like, even if you also identify like being shy, it's okay, and just try asking, just practice asking, because it's a good habit to get into. And expanding our networks. So this is something that I learned has been very important for, you know, just becoming like a graduate student or just in general, networking. And as I grew up, making friends didn't matter. With my family, it was only la familia, only the family, because like family is always going to be there. Like, yes, okay, that's true for many cases, but networking is really important. Talking to other professionals or just like, getting in contact and say it's in, like say you're applying to a graduate program, right? Letters of recommendation are a thing and they're important to ask for. But then you might find yourself asking, like, who do I ask for a letter of recommendation? So in that example, like networking is really important. If you might not have someone in mind now and you plan to apply for graduate school, it's a good time to start, maybe attending a professor's office hours, or if they don't have any because it's virtual now, just emailing them and, staying connected. And if you are in class, maybe turn on your Zoom camera and, make those interactions. Or, there's a lot of different ways to network, not just like in class, but even in works or, it's really helpful. And again, it's something that I've still been kind of like noticing and overcoming because I thought this whole time, like, oh no, it doesn't matter to talk to other people, but it does, and it's very helpful because maybe they know like some program or maybe they know about a job position that would be, helpful for you. So it's definitely worth it. And utilizing resources. So these things might seem like, oh yeah, common sense, of course, but in many cases they're not. Like utilizing resources, professor office hours, or staff office hours, or like workshops, just attending them, they're available. And it's unfortunate we don't have this like, oh, this is exactly like going to help you with this. They might be worded kind of funny that you might not know, like, like how is that going to help me? But utilizing your resources, and when someone says, oh, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask, I definitely recommend it. Or Denise and I were available as resources for like graduate school, or to ask any questions about that. So when we say it, we genuinely mean it. Even like for myself, if I don't have the answer, I am kind of in the know for graduate school to be able to start that search, like that Google search, to be able to help the best that I can. And if not, then I could just ask Denise, or ask our supervisor, or ask the professor. So it's utilizing resources is very important. And this is something I hope that y'all can kind of just like ask yourself and kind of just think upon. I want to ask, I noticed that we're going a bit over time, but if there's anything someone wants to add, or if someone wants to drop in the chat, as it is getting late, I'll move forward, but this is definitely something we can come back to if anyone wants to talk about. And OSC resources available for first-gen students. So these are specific to the Onda Student Center. As Denise mentioned, her office hours, we have Malapon's office hours, and I do want to say, like, she actually has her master's and PhD. She got it from Graduate School of Education also. And so she's familiar, and she's a great resource to ask questions about. And Denise, she shared her experience, and Mika, she's actually was a transfer, and she had but we're definitely resources to ask any questions. And even if you don't know what to ask, you can just join the office hours, kind of get the conversation, and maybe like that conversation will lead to something else that you hadn't even thought of. I have my grad school guidance pop-in, which is essentially like my office hours. And it's just this time to talk about graduate school or just UCSB, or just if you just want to chat with someone, I'm available for that like hour. You can just pop in for 5 minutes or stay the whole time. And I can just continue to share my experience and for any questions you have. And there's STEM Power Hour with Janine. She's a PhD student in like ecology, evolution, and marine biology. And Nate, he is a PhD student in material sciences. And so they're also great resources to utilize. And they're available on Fridays from 12 to 1 to just answer questions, as we do recognize like the STEM experience, the STEM field and graduate school student experience is a bit different than like in education or humanities and social sciences. So they're also available. And then there's also UCSB resources, like the UCSB FirstGen site. This is a site that is like a resource of resources. It's firstgen.ucsb.edu, and there is information on like programs such as like EOP and McNair's, and a bunch of different resources for students who identify as FirstGen and other identities. And there's also the Keep Learning website, which is for resources for remote learning. And so I definitely recommend for y'all to take a look at these websites, and maybe you'll find something that's interesting or something that, you know, you hadn't known. And like, I definitely am still learning about all these programs that they offer at UCSB. And with that, I do want to say, you know, stay connected. You could email us. We're on Facebook, and Instagram is like the most up to date. And we post stories, we share different resources. And then on the YouTube, we do post our workshops. And we also have a website, and that website is kept up to date also. And you can see our team photo. I do want to ask if there's any questions about anything. I can go back to slides, or if anyone wants to add anything. Yes, Denise.
I was just going to add that thank you all for attending. Definitely, please attend any of our future events, subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already. And we have our office hours, but then our peers like Lori have their course mentoring hours as well. If you go on the ONDAS website, at the bottom of the screen, there's a calendar with my office hours, Sophie's office hours, Lori's course mentoring or office hours, all the peers and Malapan and Mika's hours as well. So you don't have to necessarily like remember or remember when our office hours are. And the link for the Zoom and everything are always on those calendars as well. And our programs each week are on there as well.
I do have a list of the references that were mentioned. So if anyone would like the presentation, I can definitely share it with y'all. And if there are no questions, y'all are free to go. Thank y'all for joining us